From the University of Nebraska at Omaha, this is NCITE Insights. I'm your host, Erin Grace. Join us as we discuss today's most pressing issues in terrorism and targeted violence with experts from the field. Gina, welcome to the show, NCITE Insights. We are starting off the new year, 2025, really on a sad and relevant note to our work. So I want to jump in right there. I believe I woke up New Year's Day first to the news that a man had plowed into a crowd on Bourbon Street. And then to texts from you talking about the NCITE work on this. And so I think that our viewers and listeners would benefit from just a peek behind the curtain here at what this is like at NCITE. So maybe we'll just review now, catch people up to where we are. Today is January 3rd. We know that the attacker who has been killed was a 42-year-old U.S.-born Texan. He had driven from his home in Houston to New Orleans. He had bypassed a police car that was placed to block this very pedestrian-heavy street that never closes to revelers. And he had ended up killing 14 people, and he injured scores of others. And then a couple hours later, in a different American city, you have a Cybertruck that blows up essentially outside Trump Tower. Authorities are now looking at that as a suicide. These appear to be very unrelated, but they do share some things in common. So let's just jump into the New Orleans story and what we know about the attacker who had proclaimed an affiliation to the Islamic State.
Yeah, so, he had a flag on the back of his truck, and that was one of the main sort of telltale signs of, a lot of the operational manuals that the Islamic State puts out talk about displaying a flag. One of the things about violent ideological groups is they like symbols to, make sure that it's just right in your face who you're there for. Thought it was interesting that they found out he was homemade. He made the flag. So he had found the logo and then created it himself. He didn't order it from anyone. So that takes a lot of effort and creativity, and sometimes the more time you put into something, the more committed you are. So it could have, resulted in him being even more committed after he made that logo. So just really interesting characteristics that would show why they were so quick to attribute it to being an ISIS-inspired or enabled attack.
Okay. Tell me more about this idea of inspired. We've seen that a lot in the news. What is the difference between being inspired or enabled or even directed to commit an act of violence?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, when we think about terrorists in the United States, particularly those associated with FTOs or foreign terrorist organizations, we think about 9/11 and that felt very complicated and orchestrated and financed and directed, and they had to fly them all here, and they had to engage in surveillance, and there was they were almost like soldiers who were implementing the vision of Osama bin Laden. And so that's what a lot of us think about with terrorism. To be honest, since 9/11 and since the tremendous success of the counterterrorism community, we've been able to stop a lot of those directed plots. It's very difficult to plan something with that level of detail from abroad. And so the strategy that has shifted with a lot of foreign terrorist organizations is to either recruit you to come to their area of operation to engage in fights. We call those foreign terrorist fighters, or to inspire an attack here in your homeland. So if you can't come here are some ideas of what you could be doing there. There's three different sort of levels of what we would call a homegrown violent extremist. The first is, someone who's inspired, what you just said, right? So maybe they've read some propaganda, but they really just engage in an attack that they're, very familiar with. They might not have learned anything new, but they were inspired to engage in some attack. So you see a lot of those with where they engage in some sort of episodic violence. The second are these enabled attacks. And enabled is when they actually give pretty specific direction and operational guidance. And so this is oftentimes through giving materials around, like there was a really specific one called How to Build a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom. And it gave ingredients of how to make a bomb using homemade things that were just available in your mom's kitchen.
Wow.
And so that's an example of enabling a plot, because that person probably wouldn't have known that without that kind of operational manual. And then you have this sort of mix, which is, I'm going to give you this operational guidance through all of these different types of operational guides that are out there. But then there may also be something that's in between directed and enabled, which is where you actually have someone communicating with someone from a foreign terrorist organization. And so you've seen that, and really, and it's not as black and white. It's not like it's right before and they're telling them, turn here, like you would think of as a true directed plot, but they may say, if you're going to go attack today, make sure you take a video of yourself before. And so that is an example of maybe they've learned all the operational techniques from the existing manuals that are out there, but they're still in contact with sort of a handler, if you will, who is giving them some guidance about how to become even more prolific or more notorious in their attack. And you've seen that in a lot of ISIS cases in the United States. Seamus Hughes, one of our researchers, calls them virtual entrepreneurs, which is where they are really trying to entrepreneurially inspire different ranges of activities. So that one is, I think, in between enabled and directed, because it's not like the person, like what you think of with 9/11, where they were actually directing very specific activities and these guys were just kind of soldiers.
Following orders.
Yeah. But it is like this person has an idea that he got from all these different manuals, but there is some level of direction to make it even more impactful, like release this video here or rent this truck like this, so they can give some specific ways to sort of amplify that attack.
Is the strategy that we're talking about, the difference between hands-on and hands-off strategies, of course, is the strategy when it's so hands-off, you just hope they pick it up in the soup to cause mayhem and hurt your enemy by any means necessary? It doesn't have to be at a certain time or place or date. It could just be at the perpetrator's choosing. Is that kind of the idea of pumping it out into the ecosphere? Yeah,
I mean, there's obviously some hope or idea that they'll do it in a more notorious or media. You think about what terrorism is. It's trying to intimidate or coerce for a political or ideological goal beyond the immediate target. So it wasn't just about the people they killed that day. It was about all the people who were watching. So they definitely wanted it to be viewed by a lot of people, which is why, choosing the target of Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve made a lot of sense from a strategic standpoint for him. The other piece is you have to think about the individual's characteristics. And so we've learned now that this person had a lot of risk factors for any type of violence, right? And so he's, gone through a divorce, he was in debt, had separated from an organization he'd been part of for a long time. So those are all risk factors for lots of detrimental things. But one of the things also is depression. And one of the things that can happen over the holidays when everyone else is joyous and happy is it can really amplify or exacerbate those feelings of being alone. And so it's hard to know if he chose it strategically because of all the revelers around New Year's, because they also would have been there around Mardi Gras.
Yeah. Right.
Or if that was something individual to him, and that he was actually like, this is the time I have to just end my life in a way that is for the higher good or for this organization that I feel a part of.
Thank you for saying that, Gina. It had that aspect of the holidays on this timing had not occurred to me. And maybe you want to draw out more of the significance of like New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Is that what you were thinking about, or is there more symbolic significance to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of evidence around New Year's being part of at least the Islamic State's ideology, with the exception of, there have been some attacks in the past around New Year's. And so it's hard. That's a confound, right? You don't know if it's because that's maximum media attention or if it's because that individual finally felt enough motivation to go ahead and take his own life and the lives of others.
His method of attack, let's talk about that for a second. He rented a truck. The truck had explosives in it. He also had weaponry. He shot at people. It's kind of a grab bag of a lot of things we've seen before. But can you talk about the idea of using your vehicle as a weapon?
Yeah, it's been used by a lot of violent ideological extremists. I think about Charlottesville with the car.
Oh, right.
Right. And so that was to kill people who were peacefully protesting a Unite the Right rally. You also had Nice and, a horrific accident or vehicle ramming that happened there with a lorry, a very large truck that had been used. You just recently, and just this last December, had one at a Christmas market in Germany.
Right.
And so this is a tactic that lots of different ideological groups are using and learning from each other, but it's one specifically that our intelligence and analysis apparatus from Department of Homeland Security put out a warning about right before the holidays, that they had heard more chatter on English-based Islamic State channels encouraging people with all the large gatherings that were going to be happening in the U.S. around the holidays to use a vehicle. So you have this wide range of examples of successful attacks doing that, and then you have some specific operational guidance directing people to do that.
And certainly vehicles don't exactly raise alerts, right? Like everybody has a car. So it's an easy weapon to kind of get your hands on if you wanted to
great
cause
point.
a kind of mayhem,
Yeah,
right?
it's not the same as, openly carrying a weapon out in front of people and easier to access. So that's what probably makes it novel, right? And surprising. Something that, Sam Hunter and his team are studying with this concept of malevolent creativity and using everyday objects in unexpected ways is one of the strategies that he studies that terrorists are using.
So I'm glad you mentioned Sam, because it makes me think of another one of our colleagues, Austin, and his work on countering improvised explosive devices. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Because bomb materials, were a central part of just not only New Orleans, but what was in the Cybertruck in Las Vegas.
Yeah, we have seen an increase in terrorist use of improvised explosive devices, particularly over the past 5 years, according to Austin Dr. Angie Benda's research here. I think there's a lot more thwarted or foiled improvised explosive device plots in the United States than the general public knows about.
Yeah.
It is a weapon of choice. It's very inexpensive. It feels exciting. It draws view. Even the images of the Cybertruck IED that happened outside of the Trump Hotel in Vegas. I mean, it looked like a bomb.
Right.
And so to have this idea that you as an individual could do something like that is probably really exciting and media grabbing for these terrorists to think about, much more than. Like, I remember people used to always be worried that terrorists would poison the water supply. And it's like, that's not as an immediate of an impact as a bomb. So firearms, incendiary devices have been the weapon of choice for lots of terrorist groups for a long time.
Well, and that idea of accessibility, whether it's your car, but these bomb-making materials, at least for the Cybertruck, weren't exactly sophisticated, right? They were like camp stove fuel canisters and gasoline, holding devices. So it wasn't like it was a super sophisticated bomb per se.
Yeah. The precursors that were used for that, much less sophisticated than a lot of the IEDs that, for example, we've been studying at NCITE. But it doesn't make them less effective in terms of the explosion. It's just easier to make.
The existence of the explosive devices and what authorities thought at first. It was interesting to see how the story kind of shifted. At first, they right away know the ISIS affiliation, so that begets, is he one or is he many? Is he part of a group? They were investigating others and then quickly turned around and said, no, this just looks like one guy. I guess, however, with the Cybertruck incident happening after, it does raise the question, I guess to me, of how events inspire other events. What are you worried about looking at these two back-to-back events, hours apart, very different people, motivations, but some similar materials? What are you thinking about, or what should law enforcement or counterterrorism professionals be thinking about?
I think, immediately after let's talk about first the New Orleans one. You heard a lot of chatter on some of the English-based ISIS platforms, like things that they openly put out, calling him a martyr and sort of praising him. And so you worry that will become inspiring to people. Same thing with the Vegas individual who looks, likely to be a suicide, but just when they talked about his decorated service and, what it takes to be a Green Beret and all the training, both of those instances sort of martyred both of them. And so that's, if you have someone who is wanting to hurt themselves, to do that in a way that gets attention and gets people to talk about you feels more meaningful.
Got it.
And so both in social media and in, professional journalists and press, they're both kind of lionizing these individuals in ways that make me nervous for copycats, because it certainly can trigger someone to think, well, I may be desperate and want to kill myself, but I can do it like this and people are going to remember me.
Yeah, right. Which I also think of the needle in the haystack problem, right, for law enforcement and counterterrorism professionals, because there are a lot of people in the New Orleans case who suffer through terrible personal crises all the time, relationships breaking up, loss of job, financial troubles, you name it, and they don't go on to commit acts of violence, So how do you spot the needle in the haystack, especially with somebody with no prior criminal record or may have even been a standout employee or member of their organization? We can't live in a fortress. So how do you look at these events from a prevention standpoint?
Yeah, I think some of our work that different consortium partners have been doing about intimate partners and people that know people best. One of the key things across all of these needles in the haystack are changes in behavior.
Okay.
And so, yes, it might be difficult for someone who's an employer who may not know the person very well, or a customer service rep at a hotel. But you saw that people talked about the Facebook post changing and how the person talked. And so people that knew them well are in a better position to observe changes in behavior, which is one commonality that you see in a lot of these cases. Is a change in the level of aggression, the level of commitment to the fervor. And so I think about, Dr. Karen Spore's work at University of Maine, who looks at how to equip family members with the right tools to be able to report it, because it's not that they don't notice it, it's that they don't know how to get a non-law enforcement option to intervene earlier, which is really the goal of prevention, to really help get the right resources in place to help them. And what we need to do for the mental health community and first responder community and educators to be able to recognize the signs of mobilization and someone who's mobilizing to violence and actually have the confidence and efficacy to know what to do about it.
And we do have work looking at the nationwide suspicious activity reporting initiative, right? So you notice these changes with your loved one. What are you supposed to do? Confront them, call the cops,
Yeah. And I think that work that comes out of Department of Homeland Security, one of our board members sponsors it, looking at behavioral threat assessment management teams, which are really supposed to be these interdisciplinary teams of not just law enforcement. Yes, law enforcement, because you have to make sure you take threats seriously if there's a criminal activity, but also counselors, also educators, also people who are in healthcare. And they're really these interdisciplinary teams who all view the same problem with different lenses. And I think that has a lot of hope for prevention, because it does allow the professionals to make the decision about who to call. Does this warrant law enforcement, or does this warrant an off-ramp, as opposed to a parent who may have difficulty, being able to make that decision or even know how aberrant that behavior actually is.
We've both been on Bourbon Street. I'm thinking about the Super Bowl coming up. You've been to a Super Bowl. I was just at Mall of America. These are beloved public spheres, public spaces that we want to keep going to. Can you talk about New Orleans, delaying the Sugar Bowl by one day, but having the Sugar Bowl, they didn't cancel it, or how these public spaces can balance protection and public safety with also life must go on.
Yeah. I think as Americans, there's a certain amount of risk that we accept because we want to live in a free society where we can go to things like the Super Bowl and the Sugar Bowl and Mall of America. And so I think it's that balance of the safety of knowing that security is there, but also not feeling like you are blocked from enjoying an American experience of these, malls or crowded public spaces. One of the sister COEs, Sentry, which is the Soft Target Protection Center of Excellence, they're doing really great work about something called beautiful security. And it's really just how to have a virtual sentry or watchman over public crowded spaces that is not as sort of overbearing as having physical presence or physical barriers, and how we can use technology for good in that way to protect ourselves at public spaces. So that gives me hope as well.
Yeah. What else would you like to say about this? Certainly the story is going to continue to develop. But before we depart, what should our readers/listeners know about NCITE's work in this space?
Yeah, I think, this is our 5th year of doing this research on behalf of Office of University Programs. And, we want to be a resource both for people in the government, but people who are charged with protecting crowded public spaces. My bias is that's all of us, right? Yeah. We all have the responsibility to protect crowded public spaces. And so for the general public to know that there are resources out there, and we are trying to help make sense for them of these individuals, the types of backgrounds they have, how they can protect themselves, what are the resources to be able to call if they see something, how to actually report it.
Yeah.
And so just to know that academic centers like ours exist because we are supposed to be resources for the public, to be able to translate kind of a scary topic into something that people have knowledge about and then have confidence that they can actually play a role in protecting crowded spaces that are important for them.
I'm glad you said that, Gina, because a lot of times we sort of feel like the responsibility is shoveled off to these other people who have this as a job. Certainly that is true, but all of us do play a role. And and frankly, I'm glad you said that, because we are putting on our website, so unomaha.edu/NCITE, right on our homepage, kind of an easy place to harness our research around this topic here while people are thinking about it and wondering what they can do about it, because these events are scary and they make us feel like we don't have control. And so I think it's important that the public knows that we're on the case and we're trying to help our law enforcement partners do their jobs and keep Americans safe.
Yeah. I think the way that we've broken it down with looking at who the perpetrator is, how they attacked, and why they attacked are 3 different areas that we can bucket a lot of our research under. I mean, we've done a lot of work to look at indicators for violence, who the person was and why that person radicalized, how looking at the nature of the IED, the prevalence of these vehicle rammings, and then why, understanding the motivation, the specific target, the location, why that person's background maybe gave rise to that kind of behavior. So really trying to help people to understand and translate this academic research into, just being able to understand scary events that are happening around you.
Great. Well, with that said, the year is fresh, and we have this terrible event to start us off with, but we also know that we have research and we have sharp minds on the subject, and hopefully going forward, we will be ready for whatever comes next.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. This series is produced by Ben Badafarano, Erin Grace, Scott Jordan, and Blake Ersch. Thank you for joining us for another episode of NCITE Insights. The National Counterterrorism, Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, or NCITE, is an academic center of excellence for the Department of Homeland Security. Looking to find out more? Check out our website at ncite.unomaha.edu or email us at ncite@unomaha.edu.